You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we have some breaking news from Donald Trump. He has just nominated Ed Martin as the full-term U.S. Attorney in Washington, D.C. That is the office that you worked out of for decades. Can you explain why this nomination in particular is so dangerous?
Yeah, so Ed Martin is singularly unqualified to be the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia, and I'll talk about why that is in a minute. But he is unqualified by experience. He is unqualified by disposition. This is somebody who represented January 6th defendants. Now, that certainly doesn't disqualify him. Lots of folks go from being defense attorneys to being prosecutors or even appointed as United States attorneys. But this guy, Ed Martin, not only represented J6 defendants, he sat on a board that raised money for J6 defendants. And believe it or not, Brian, and this is really hard for folks in the legal community to believe, after he represented a particular January 6th defendant, he became acting U.S. attorney, and he filed a motion. He signed a motion trying to dismiss the case of his former client. That is something for which I would bet he's already been referred to bar counsel, and that is actionable because that is big ticket, unethical conduct, potentially disbarable, and it is a conflict of interest. Guess what? You can't be a defense attorney and the prosecutor in the same case. I'm surprised he didn't try to make himself a judge in that case as well. So, and this is a guy, Brian, who has never prosecuted so much as a traffic ticket. And now you're going to make him the top prosecutor in what is one of the most consequential United States attorney's offices in the country. I don't say that because it was my professional home for decades. Here's why I say it. So the United States attorney's offices all around the country and in the territories do one thing. They prosecute federal crimes. 92 of the 93 U.S. attorney's offices. But one prosecutes not only all the federal crimes, but that office, my former office, also prosecutes all the local crimes. It is a mega prosecutor's office. Think about this. If the New York, Manhattan United States Attorney's Office, the federal prosecutors, merged with Alvin Bragg's Manhattan District Attorney's Office, and they did all of the prosecuting, federal and local, that would be a mammoth undertaking. That's what we do at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. Why do we do all the local prosecuting as if we were district attorneys for the District of Columbia? Because D.C. is not a state. They don't have state court prosecutors, so the feds do it all. It is perhaps the singular most important U.S. Attorney's Office in the country because of its jurisdictional mandate. And I'll tell you, putting a stop the steal guy like Ed Martin, who went to the Capitol on January 6th, who posted that, hey, it's like Mardi Gras, all good here, a regular party, as people were hunting for the vice president and for our elected officials and beating the hell out of police officers who were protecting the Capitol. To Ed Martin, that was a party like Mardi Gras. To put him in charge of all prosecutions, federal and local, in the District of Columbia is downright dangerous.
Glenn, you had just mentioned the prospect of disbarment because he sought to dismiss a case against somebody who he himself was seeking to prosecute. If he was disbarred by the Bar Council, what kind of an impact does that have on his ability to continue operating as U.S. Attorney? Or is there no mandate that you have a law license to continue operating in that position?
You know, Brian, you just stumped me because this scenario is so outrageous. I don't think anybody has ever had to answer that question before, but let me work through it. So when you're the United States Attorney, basically all court filings are submitted in essence under your signature and authority. So I would be hard pressed to say a United States Attorney, I guess, could keep his name off all legal pleadings, could relinquish that authority. It makes no damn sense to me. So I think one way or another, if a U.S. attorney ended up being disbarred, they would probably have to leave the U.S. Attorney's office, leave that position. But that's only a guess because it's never been happened. But, really, even more importantly, I'm not saying he will be disbarred or this is necessarily a disbarrable offense. What we know is his name was on a motion to dismiss a case involving one of his clients, which, the gross features of that is as unethical as it gets. Now, maybe he'll say, well, somebody else signed my signature. It was an auto pen. I didn't know anything about it. We'll wait to see what kind of nonsensical defense he may try to throw up. But even more fundamentally problematic, Brian, is just because he has a law license doesn't mean he is equipped to be the United States Attorney for the District of Columbia. In a very real sense, it would be like saying, you know what? This guy's got a medical degree. He's never performed surgery, but let's walk him into the operating room and have him perform brain surgery. Wouldn't end up well for the patient. In this case, the patient basically is the people of the District of Columbia and the honest and ethical application of the law, the criminal laws in Washington, D.C. This will end badly.
Glenn, what happens in the event that the prosecutors who are serving under Ed Martin at the D.C. office lose faith in the person who's leading them? So in the event that the prosecutors who compose the vast majority of folks who work there don't agree with the positions being put forward by Ed Martin, and yet they're in a position where he directs them in terms of what they have to do.
Well, I think we've just seen several examples of what might happen and what we can expect happening at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. We had 7 prosecutors, a U.S. attorney, supervisors in the public integrity section, line prosecutors, 7 of them offer their righteous resignations rather than doing the wrong thing, the corrupt thing, the unethical thing that one of Donald Trump's henchmen at the Department of Justice, Emil Bove, was trying to force them to do. I have a feeling we may see the same thing begin happening at the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. Nobody wants to work for, an unqualified U.S. attorney, but even worse, a potentially corrupt U.S. attorney. So I think my friends and colleagues, hundreds of them, are still there, including people I supervised and tried cases with. They are still there. I have a feeling they're going to try standing up to whatever it is Ed Martin might tell them to do if they don't believe that it's right, that it's lawful, that it's ethical. And then they're going to have a decision to make. If they have to, offer a principled resignation to avoid being forced to do the wrong thing, I have a feeling you're going to see a lot of folks do that. Again, all of this ends with increased danger to the people of the District of Columbia.
Okay, I want to dig into that a little bit because you had mentioned that they would be forced to resign if they're not willing to do something corrupt, some corrupt edict that was handed down by Ed Martin. But don't they swear an oath to uphold the law? And if Ed Martin is doing something, or is asking them to do something that is corrupt, illegal, unconstitutional, politically motivated, then don't they have an obligation to refuse to do it? And so it's not like their only avenue here is just to resign. They can just say no, and then if he wants to fire them, fine, they can join a class action lawsuit for wrongful termination. But don't they have an obligation to uphold their oath and not just blindly follow the orders that were handed down by Ed Martin?
Yes, and I don't want to sort of, split hairs here, but when let's assume you're ordered to do something that you know is unethical and unlawful, and as a prosecutor you say, I refuse. Generally speaking, the next move is, and this is just kind of the culture of government service, I refuse. And if you continue to insist that I do it, I offer my resignation. Why would people do that rather than saying, I refuse and I'm going to sit right here until you fire me, and then I'm going to spend the next couple of years in court battling in a lawsuit over the wrongful termination? That is a difficult decision for people to make. And totally. I wouldn't just casually or cavalierly say, you know what? Just stand your ground. You know you're going to get fired instead of resigning. So just spend the next couple of years in court trying to win your back pay back and trying to, perhaps be reinstated to government. All the while, your reputation may be tarnished by those who really don't understand what's going on in your situation. These are very difficult decisions for people who have been with the Department of Justice for a long time, people who have families they are supporting. They would probably rather resign, I don't want to speak for them, and go to a law firm or go to some other government position in a state government than have to suffer the consequences of being wrongfully terminated.
Well, just building on that, let me push back and ask, if they're going to lose their job anyway because they're not willing to do Trump and Ed Martin's unconstitutional or illegal or unethical bidding, then the options are either resign and lose your job or get fired, be part of a class action lawsuit. But either way, you've lost your job. Either way, you're going to have to seek employment elsewhere. So why not at least give yourself the option of getting that back pay and be part of something virtuous by virtue of being part of, an effort to push back against this government?
Yeah, resigning and going to another job looks a certain way, but being fired looks a whole different way, even if you know in your heart that you were wrongfully terminated and you're going to spend a year or two fighting it in court. Again, these are difficult decisions for people to make. And I think it's easy for us to say, Brian, and I say it all the time, don't obey in advance. I don't purport to be in a position to make a decision for each and every person who shouldn't obey in advance. These are tough, tough times.
And finally, let's finish off with this. Glenn, you worked at that office, again, for decades. What is your sense of what the atmosphere is like there, given the fact that, you have somebody who is so overtly a stooge for Donald Trump, is so in the tank for him and his sycophants and cronies and these insurrectionists? What do you think the sense is like at the U.S. Attorney's Office in D.C.?
Well, before I directly answer that, Brian, one of the first things Ed Martin did when he was installed by Donald Trump on an acting U.S. attorney basis is he promptly fired 25 to 30 prosecutors who had worked on January 6 prosecutions. That was a horrific example of retaliation for doing your damn job, for standing up for the rights of victims and for protecting the community, not to mention our democracy. Why did he get away with firing that 25 to 30, batch of prosecutors? Because these folks had been brought in from other places and were basically still in kind of a probationary status. They hadn't been with the federal government long enough. Maybe they'd only been there a couple of years and were still in a probationary status. And the reality is, anybody in a probationary status can be discharged really for pretty much any reason. And so he took full advantage of that. He can't do that to the permanent civil servants, public servants who have been there for years and have satisfied the probationary period. But here is the good news now, kind of talking about the horrific thing that Ed Martin did to decimate the troops virtually on day one. Everybody in government, including everybody at all of the United States attorney's offices, got the fork in the road email from the Trump administration saying resign or else. And the or else was, we can't guarantee your job if you don't resign. You know what? The 2 million members of the federal government workforce have stood strong against that despicable act by our federal government. Resign or else. The latest reporting that I read as of late yesterday was a total of about 75,000 federal government employees of the 2.1 million federal workforce decided to hit resign and go on their merry way. Most of them, Brian, are sort of retirement eligible or nearing retirement or have other job opportunities awaiting them. So that might be a number, 75,000 of 2.1 million. That is kind of normal attrition anyway. I can't swear to that, but that's the way it
3% roughly.
There, you're better at math than me. I was just going to say a little bit because I couldn't do 3%. But the good news is, and I think that holds true at the United States attorney's offices across the country, they're like, resign or else? Yeah, we're not resigning. And I think most of the people will stand up to even somebody as unqualified and unsuitable to be U.S. attorney as Ed Martin.
Well, we'll keep obviously a very close eye on this. Again, I know that this is an issue that's close to you in that this was the office that you worked out of for years and years and years. So we'll stay on top of this. As soon as we have any updates, we'll bring them to you. For folks who are watching right now, if you want to follow along, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.